everyone. Welcome to the DePINed Podcast. I'm your host, Tom Trowbridge. I'm thrilled to have Deborah here, the co-founder of Althea. Welcome, Deborah.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Excited to be here.
And Althea is solving problems in the telecom space, and telecom is a huge subsector of DePIN. So why don't you tell us a little bit more detail about what exactly Althea is doing?
Yeah, so Althea is new system design for ways of funding, building, and operating infrastructure, and primarily been used in telecom networks. And, really when we look at how Althea is designed, we harken back to our roots back in 2017, where we were looking at building telecom networks and noticed a lot of the systemic design problems, at least especially in the U.S., where you'd have areas that are have a lot of granting that have been giving U.S. government money, and in fact, up to about 2020, there was $100 billion in the U.S. For granting that made very little difference, less than 1% in the amount of new infrastructure or the amount of actually changing the digital divide. So we realized there was kind of two main core pillars that were systemic problems. One is the way that we capture value. It was a rental market. You had to capture the user, and then it created all these artificial dead ends. And so Althea essentially is a machine-to-machine billing and microtransactions between devices in a network, between primarily routers in a network that automatically, programmatically pay each other for bandwidth that's moving along the network. And then the other sort of big unlock there was our price-aware routing protocol. So instead of prescriptive routes through the internet, the users choose their choice. There's a little slider bar, and they choose their choice of cost or quality, and then the network routes through the network their choice, and then pays each of the providers of infrastructure programmatically. And what the price-aware routing protocol and the machine billing really opened up, when we think about the future, is what we're now building now, which is liquid infrastructure, the funding piece of it, allowing us to tokenize the infrastructure itself and provide that streaming revenue back to a variety of different funders and participants in a network. And it really kind of shifts the dynamics of how networks are built and operated.
All right, there's a lot to dig into there. So super interesting. Well, let's back up for a second. And usually I start off by asking people how to define DePIN, because the sector has grown a lot and continues to grow. So how would you first define the DePIN as a term, as a sector?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because Althea was sort of DePIN before DePIN was even coined a term. But I think it really is rooted in the core principles of open participation and ownership. And when we think about ownership, from my viewpoint, that means choice and leverage. When you own a piece of infrastructure and you can make choices about what happens to it and you can leverage it to earn more revenue, then that's really kind of true ownership. And the other kind of defining principle is being able to participate in an open way in infrastructure itself.
I think that those are great terms. I guess I would add one piece to that, but the definition have been working with, tell me what you think of this, is crowdsourced physical infrastructure put in a sort of common network that serves a proper use, i.e. it's not mining blocks, and secured and incented by token economics. So the only thing you didn't mention was token economics, but it sounds like that's a piece of your protocol as well.
Yeah, and a bit of a difference in our protocol too, because really we're preparing for a new machine economy where machines are making decisions based on user preference, right? So not so much manual. And we are wanting to create a platform for those payments and the way that machines interact. So instead of sort of giving token incentives for doing certain behaviors, we created a system around sustainable operation of that, kind of Stripe for machines platform. That makes sense.
It does, but that's going to require some more explanation, I think. But let's get back to Althea and the and kind of how it works. And so is this about businesses or consumers making preferences about speed versus cost and opting into this network, which then can prioritize a particular speed or lower price and route traffic dependent on those variables?
That's correct. And so there are two different audiences for this. We do use these in broadband networks, right? So people that have home internet are choosing their choice of cost or latency performance on a minute by minute basis. And where we're evolving is a lot in the enterprise market. So we also developed our own 5G core we call Key LTE 5G. But where that becomes very interesting is that enterprises can actually choose the specificity of latency that they want to utilize or adopt for individual slices of the network or individual devices or performance characteristics like IoT versus MNO or mobile devices, et cetera. So I think that, where we've seen adoption and traction so far is on the consumer side. But really, a lot of our current, or then the focus for the last couple of years, is on the 3GPP type networks, so LTE, 5G, and all of the Gs emerging after that. But basically, allowing for machines to connect on the eSIM platform, and then allowing the enterprises to have, that specificity of latency that is really driving things forward.
And on that, I mean, presumably consumers have to either be confident of achieving a price savings or a quality increase that are material. So how do you think about what the value proposition is using Althea?
Yeah, well, I mean, we're a platform that is B2B, right? So it is a platform that other operators use to provide internet to their communities, and they support that. I mean, we really believe that networks are need an operational layer or to be sustainable. Somebody has to answer the phone at 3 a.m. The internet's down. And so these operators within the Althea network can capture a bandwidth fee, or they can capture a daily sort of service fee. And those operators have some control around kind of setting prices. But what we've seen is because this is such a community integrated platform, many operators are being able to finance their networks with like $5,000 or $10,000. And then, of course, providing a really affordable network to the users. Or most Althea networks, I think, are right around $40 a month, which is very competitive in most areas, and oftentimes much cheaper.
So, are these new providers that are springing up to offer the service, or are these existing providers changing their network architecture to take advantage of the savings?
Well, we have both. Primarily, it's been new operators as the system has evolved, and what we're really excited about now, especially with the now that the 5G core has really evolved to being really robust, is new operators utilizing this to expand into new verticals. So maybe they're a fixed wireless operator, maybe they're a city, they're looking to provide handsets and or IoT. Smart cities work, they can utilize the platform, build affordably, and then connect a variety of different devices. That's the other thing about Althea. Althea is hardware agnostic. So fiber optic, coax, fixed wireless equipment, and 5G, all on the same platform.
All right, that's certainly interesting. And how does the cost savings happen? Are you using underused resources along the way? What are the partners involved, and what makes this sort of, where's the D for the physical infrastructure piece come in?
I'm going to kind of share that with an example, right? So we have, for example, a network in North Carolina that's operated by a local business called Wave 7. And Wave 7 works with a church. They work with the city. Each of those sort of entities operate some infrastructure or have some infrastructure on their roof. And then they get paid as part of the network a percentage. It's maybe 1 cent a gigabyte or something like that, just automatically for being part of that infrastructure. So that you could see in that it coordinates a decentralized group of participants in that network, which is where the decentralized sort of comes in, is the open participation in the network, And then the protocol itself coordinates how these different entities then can participate and earn revenue from that.
And how can the different entities earn in that example?
So Althea is a metered and billing platform. The machines in the network that are part of the routing protocol meter and count the bandwidth moving between the networks, and then automatically pay submit microtransactions between the different nodes in the network. So it is not a token incentive. It is really actually just a stable coin moving between, let's say, me, myself, and you as I forwarded you bandwidth through the network.
Gotcha. So there's an existing provider whose infrastructure you're using, and then you're basically doing a metering, a per byte or gigabit or megabyte metering and payment for that bandwidth.
Correct. But I would say it does not have to be existing. So most of the networks are built using the Althea protocol from the ground up, connected to a wholesale, or middle mile connectivity fiber, and then distributed out either by fiber or fixed wireless or 5G.
And distributed out by who?
So, like the kind of traditional entities are formed, they'll usually be like a cooperative, or like in Wave 7's case, they'll work together with their community to put up the equipment, right? So they'll talk to their church, they'll talk to the city, say, we'd like to utilize your rooftop. Can we put equipment here? So while the installation and management of the network is operated by, an entity, different people can still participate in the network, and have that hardware on there. But it's managed by, typically it's managed by someone else. Some of the benefits of that is that, because there is an entity involved, you can have things like insurance on the equipment. You can provide SLAs, or you can provide, sort of guarantees that the service is going to be a certain way, comply to terms of service and mandatory FCC regulations. And so even though the participants in the network are disparate, the management is done in a professional and compliant way with regulatory norms.
If I'm understanding this correctly, and sorry to get into so much detail, I'm just curious, you mentioned this one network in, I think it was North Carolina. Does that mean then you would have individual networks that are sort of separate entities with separate management kind of all over the US, right? Different groups host and manage and build and implement networks using your protocol kind of all over?
Yep, that's correct. So there's Althea networks in 13 US states and have built in 4 countries.
Great. And so the fact the use pattern is someone comes to you and says, okay, or discovers the protocol and says, listen, I think, I think my community has a need for this, and I think that we're being overcharged. And so if we want to we think we can optimize the existing infrastructure better than it is being used. And so we're going to, install and adopt your protocol, and then also install some hardware for last mile connectivity on top of it effectively.
Yeah, that's more or less it. I mean, I think what's exciting now is that over the last few years, we've also been working with enterprises. At a EV company that we've chatted with and we've been working with who are looking to build these kinds of networks to offset some of their public connectivity costs. And I think we'll see more and more of that now as some of the eSIM platforms are getting easier to roam between private and public networks. And I think that's, the exciting frontier that's ahead of us. But yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, it's like Linux, but for networks.
Okay. I'm getting it now. Great. Well, let's talk about Deborah. What's your background? How did you get here? How did you become a co-founder here? And how did you get this telecom expertise? We got pretty deep in the weeds here for people who haven't been in telecom their whole career. So where did you develop all this information?
Yeah, so my background is sort of a mix of advocacy work and net neutrality and kind of freedoms of the internet, and early Bitcoin mining back in 2012, mined Bitcoin on a GPU. And being in the trenches in wireless and an MSP or managed service providing, did that for about a decade prior to launching Althea. That's really where you get to viscerally understand the pain points that people have with their current internet. I mean, I think no one ever says that they love their big telco provider. And it's not because their big telco provider is evil. They're not bad people. They'd like to have more of the market share as well. But the systems were so broken, it hasn't been working for either provider or user. But yeah, so I sort of spent some time in the and I like it. I'm a ham radio operator. I built community networks. Just to provide that kind of sovereign and resilient networking that I think is really important, that we have to be vigilant about continuing to build.
Super interesting. Well, I mean, I got to think that you're the telco area is a huge subsector of DePIN. And, we've had Dawn on here, we've had Helium, we've had XNet. So a variety of providers that you kind of, have some, at least minimum understanding of what they do, and maybe even relate. Like, sounds like Dawn does a little bit of what you guys do, but just on the last mile piece, not on the actual bandwidth connectivity. They're just more about sharing the bandwidth, from what I understand, and reselling it, as opposed to actually you going a level deeper in terms of finding better pricing due to specific routing of that bandwidth. Is that fair?
Yeah, I would say that we are definitely more holistic in our structuring of the system design, kind of end to end. And now with the new RWA, basically tokenizing that the telco towers and the networks themselves, and then fractionalizing that, you really have a much more, like I said, it's more like a Stripe for machines or Stripe for telecom, where you're able to sort of set up these money Legos and the building blocks to create both the funding and the coordinating side of ISPs.
Interesting. Well, sorry, and I got a little distracted. Back to your background, we diverted from that. What's it like? You've obviously been co-founder in a pretty male-dominated space. Even telco has got to be pretty male-dominated. That's before you even hit crypto, which made that seem like a paragon of diversity, is my guess. So, how do things? Any observations on our sector here and on your experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think, like I said, I've been involved in blockchain for a very long time, at least as an enthusiast, prior to being an Althea professionally. And I did imagine that we would have welcomed diversity a bit more by now. Than we currently have, and I think this is the case with many things. It's not necessarily that the industry as a whole is less welcoming, but it's not comfortable to be here for people of color, women, these kinds of things. So yeah, I mean, my hope is that the industry as a whole gets the benefit of diversity, because from many different backgrounds and perspectives comes that creativity that keeps the industry as a whole moving forward. So I think it's very vital that we consider that, as part of the pillars and forwarding our industry.
And is there anything you think we should do specifically? Anything you find useful or would help in that regard?
I think that there's a really big missing piece in blockchain in general, which is the industry regulatory kind of bodies, industry sort of standards bodies. There's the ITU and telecom, there's IEEE and engineering and energy. There are many different industries that we think about, that self-organize a sort of a regulatory body that can fact-check information, that can steer direction, and we are lacking these. And I think we see that, and probably in terms of diversity, but also in other ways as well, where it's very hard to get open information that's verifiable, or to understand what's trustworthy and not. And I think that's a big missing gap, and I hope that changes soon.
You're gonna get some opposition in terms of wanting more regulation in this space. I'll tell you that. I think some of
no. But there's Yeah, but what we do is we self-regulate, right? That's the organization that, that can come from, just organizing and coordinating in that way. And I think there's a lot that can be done, in a peer group, toward making strides that way.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Well, listen, that I think is makes a lot of sense. Hopefully there's some groups that are doing that. But we will see. And then the question is it crypto? Why is it DePIN specific? Probably easier to start small. But with DePIN, I think that's more of a possibility because DePIN has so many more touch points with the quote unquote real world, or at least with Web 2. So you think that there'd be more pressure for those type of bodies to be formed from both the existing people in this subsector as well as customers and others who are looking at using and deploying it. So you'd think that this could be a place to start some of the initiatives that you're talking about, much more so than crypto overall, which can kind of live in its own little bubble almost in perpetuity. And our DePIN sector doesn't have that luxury, right? You're out there, right? Communities are engaging you, you need real businesses to sign up. So that is going to lead to this kind of area having much more access and dependency on kind of the outside world, if you will, for better and worse.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that's a positive thing, and it's also some of the reason why we build perhaps a bit slower than other projects, and that we have fire stations that are using the protocol, and these mission critical types of applications that that can't be disrupted. It's a utility. So yes, I agree that there's probably it's kind of a different kind of forcing set on the DePIN side than just this crypto as a whole, where you can be more experimental, perhaps.
Definitely. So tell me about what makes Althea possible today that would have made it impossible or difficult, pick your time, 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. There's certain projects, there's been hardware advancements that literally made their project possible. I think of Helium in that example, where a chip came off of patent that reduced the cost of their routers from about $5,000 to like $500, or in that order of magnitude, right? And Hive Mapper camera technology wasn't like this 5 years ago. Is there anything in your technology stack which is kind of relatively recent, or was this possible, years ago as well?
It's a good question. I think there's a few different catalysts that make the timing very interesting right now. I would say one, you're correct in that essentially the lower cost of storage and processing in telecom hardware has been a big catalyst to moving everything ahead. I mean, we run a whole 5G core, the routing, the building, the wallet, everything on a home router. So you can go to Best Buy, buy a Dynalink for $70 and you can run your own 5G network, which is pretty cool. And I don't think, years past that would be possible to have that much processing power. You see the telco itself is more like even with 5G, right? The advancement of all these sort of disaggregated pieces is sort of made possible by those advancements. That said, I think what is there's two kind of bigger drivers here. One is, of course, the machine economy. I think in the very near future, we'll be making less and less sort of manual payments with a credit card, or net 30ing your smart trash can or something. And so for us, it's really been sort of the impetus and the catalyst for thinking about things in more programmatic ways. You're certainly starting to see that on the AI side, right? With them sort of buying the processing power of the AI itself. And then the other one is eSIM and SIM technology. And this is still evolving, though. And I wish that it would have been a lot quicker. It's been more of a journey than I would have thought. But SIMs moving from a purely physical piece that you put into your your phone or whatever, to eSIM to vSIM, where you can easily change platform. I mean, even something as simple as putting multiple profiles in one IMSI or SIM is relatively new, and these things are still a little bit rough around the edges, and I'm excited to see them sort of smooth out. But that's really pretty darn new. But that allows us to really think about what's a public network, what's a private, do these things need to be as distinct? And I think that's what's pretty exciting about the next few years.
Yeah, really interesting. I mean, I have an eSIM, and when I travel, I get an eSIM, and it makes life a lot easier. But this is still, try to call AT&T to put an eSIM on as your second SIM, and get comfortable for a multi-hour discussion as you escalate up the supervisor chain before someone can actually help you do it. So we're still a little early in that, but I see where you're going with it. But does that imply you think we end up with a large number, like there's no limit in terms of the efficiency that either we collectively or Althea specifically can help squeeze out of some of these existing hardware infrastructures and be complemented by last mile connectivity? So this is something that as technology advances, you see like a whole number of private public networks just proliferating.
100%. I mean, and the line gets a bit more blurred, and I'm sure we'll have there'll be a bit of a regulatory clash over it, like there was over the common carrier networks a few years back. But you think about things like a UPS or, enterprise rental car or something like that, the large geographical footprint that they have. Obviously, those cars are going to have telemetry data. And think about their public connectivity costs. One of the companies we worked with estimated that their public connectivity costs would be in the multiple $1 billion over the next decade. These are great drivers of this solution set of creating a private network that can offset costs and allow for roaming in between other networks as well. So we certainly see in a lot of the other projects also looking at Wi-Fi offloading and things like that. So we also see that Wi-Fi offloading will be a part of the future. Our perspective is that it's more going to be driven by enterprise. That UPS will create their own Wi-Fi offloading, for example, things like that.
Because they don't want to pay the carrier. They don't want to pay the carrier, the carrier effectively.
Yeah. So they don't want to pay the carrier. They also have more control and sovereignty over their own data, which is of course going to be a big, potentially monetizable asset as well. Let's think about if you have an enterprise rental car, or you're even the U.S. Postal Service. You're covering a lot of miles. You're seeing a lot of things. You're observing a lot of data. That data is potentially monetizable. And if you're running that over your private network, you can do that much easier. And then, of course, you're reducing your costs by potentially, like I said, billions of dollars.
Interesting. That I can see that for certain enterprises, no doubt. I think the carriers, though, also have the real incentive to have Wi-Fi offloading because it just frees up capacity for additional users, additional data, additional video, which is kind of the lion's share of the growth of that kind of use, right? So even if you have all this carrier offloading, there's still growth. There's still going to be plenty busy and still plenty of use of their networks, I would think, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think it'll be interesting to see potentially how that evolves as well. But, I think that potentially if I was sitting in a carrier's shoes, that it would be worthwhile to work with, like, let's say a city. Let's say you work with the city of New York, and the city of New York has Wi-Fi offloading that you pay for in bulk or something like that, or you get some sort of other benefit from it. So, again, I do think that is interesting, but will probably evolve into a larger, more enterprise-looking deal structure.
Okay. Well, listen, let's shift gears here and talk my favorite topic, token economics. How do you guys think about structuring your token? How does it work on the network? Kind of walk us through how that ecosystem facilitates the provision of service here and the rewarding of participants?
Yeah, so kind of harking back to our existing examples of kind of this Stripe or Linux for machines, the Althea L1 blockchain is the platform. It's a Cosmos SDK with a hybrid EVM, essentially moves the microtransactions between the network participants, right? So in a stablecoin, USDC, we've been using a lot of DAI. We've been on Gnosis chain for a long time, prior to now moving to Althea L1. But the SDK, the Cosmos SDK, gives us the instant finality to really scale the machine payments to a much larger level. And then stakers in the network, for their participation in staking their Althea tokens, receive a transaction fee they receive a transaction fee for and USDC or DAI or whatever is sort of moving around the network. So those stakers, and it's fairly high because it's a micro transaction. Oftentimes we see the transaction fee basically being around 9%. So let's say if somebody's paying $100 on their internet that month, $9 in USDC would be distributed pro rata to people that are staking their tokens on the network. And that creates a
So does the staking just involve locking up the tokens? Is there any other purpose? Like, what is the purpose of the staking, or it just locks the tokens up for a reward?
So that provides economic security to the network itself. The Althea token is also used in the EVM. So for liquefying assets to tokenize them, right, and as an NFT and fractionalize them with liquid infrastructure. So if you're doing that kind of RWA piece, you need the Althea token for that, or also to participate in the DePIN DEX. So the DePIN DEX is also a bit novel on the Althea chain itself, and what that allows us to do is really have infrastructure be financed and paid for by many different tokens. So maybe you have Helium or XNet or other tokens that are paying back infrastructure, and then that can be swapped to USDC in the DePIN DEX and then back out to the Althea ecosystem. So you have kind of those three pillars. You have the microtransactional module, which is prioritized and then has economic staking for the chain itself. You have the EVM module that has the liquid infrastructure and the RWA that can be financed by many different tokens. And those are swapped in the DePIN DEX kind of. And all of this is more or less under the hood for users of the Althea platform. So if you have Althea internet in your home, you probably don't even know you're using blockchain at all.
And that is a huge positive. And so what was also interesting is you guys effectively, if I think about, I have a little graph of this of projects, but you accept fiat payments, which right away is a huge thing and is really important. I think that's where every DePIN thing goes, obviously. So accept fiat. Fiat comes in under the hood. That sounds like it's transferred and converted into some type of stable coin.
Correct. Right. Yeah. So we use Stripe primarily as our onboarding platform.
Fine.
Right.
And then that is then goes around the network. 9% of that goes to pay stakers. The rest probably goes to pay, I'm guessing, the bandwidth providers or other kind of components of the network. Is that right?
Yep. So think about it this way. So let's say $100 between buyer and seller is moving around. So people that are providing bandwidth or providing services on the network, they're, $100 is going between customer and provider. And then another $9 on top of that. So the customer actually ended up paying around $109, but that $9 on top of that is the fee for the platform.
Okay. And then that is what happens. And stake, just so I'm clear, and this is a sort of my, one of my favorite expressions, everyone is a prisoner of their own experience. And so with regard to Fluence, our stake is per CPU on the network. You have to stake FLT to enable a CPU to join the network. Sounds like your stake is a little bit different, and it's more of like a DeFi protocol type stake where you just stake to the network in one pool, and that pool takes the rewards and is divided up pro rata based on the size of the pool, size of rewards. Is that right?
Somewhat, yes. There is
or are you staking to hardware in particular?
So so they're staking to the chain itself in the protocol, in a proof of stake protocol. And that has the microtransactional reward. There is also pools in the DePIN DEX that are more DeFi-like, to your point, that would hold, USDC and Althea, or other types of, stablecoin swapping and DePIN swapping of tokens there. So those pools would be more DeFi-like, in that you would stake to the pool and receive an inflationary or fee-based reward.
Okay, but so the token, just so I grasp it though, the token here, the use is only staking.
The use is in staking and in gas fees for the DEX and liquid infrastructure. So some utility in the use of tokenizing infrastructure, using the platform for swapping things, and then as staking and governance on the chain.
Okay, fair enough. And so I guess the point is, what to me I appreciate is that, pick a number. If you have $100 million worth of transactions on the network, that's 9 million going to your staking, right? And so if you have, 100 million, you've got, 9 million. If you've got, right, like it keeps moving. And so if you can predict the amount of revenue you're going to have, you can then predict the amount going to the pool. And then you can sort of gauge, okay, if I'm going to earn a 10% or 9% return, what does that imply the token should be, right? And every doubling of that should, anyway, so there, and the good thing is that's also a very predictable income stream, I've got to guess. So that is very valuable to have that. And so for people to, buy that token and understand it now, you are potentially setting yourself up, assuming you guys are successful, for dividends effectively for a dividend-like stream. I won't say the word dividend, but a stream of payments for a long period of time.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's set up to be sustainable and revenue driven. There's a certain efficiency in this perspective of building, because you build where the need is, where the revenue is going to come in, and really hyper focus on that. And I think that makes a very, efficient product. That you have product market fit. And I think that's where we've been building. And now with liquid infrastructure, it's very easy to bring, tens of millions on chain pretty much, right away with existing infrastructure assets.
So then help us understand how big you think this can be. You just mentioned infrastructure asset value, and that's one metric. The other metric, which I think I would care about most, is kind of AAR, like annual recurring revenue, or whatever you want, which acronym you want to use. So how do you think about scale or size and potential? If paint us the big picture over the next 5-10 years.
Well, I think, and it's always difficult as the founder to make predictive statements on that. But I think when we really look at the market size, and there's $2.5 trillion just locked in the top 30 telecom companies' assets on their balance sheet. And we've certainly seen things like, Dish and Verizon selling their assets, where these larger telcos are really struggling to think about, monetizing or putting their assets to work. So I think it's a pretty easy light switch as we start to bring liquid infrastructure online, that a lot of those existing telecom assets really open up that leverage and liquidity by kind of coming on chain. And so I think we have, a TAM that's, quite large. So that's the total addressable market is, obviously multiple trillions. But this also, fits this sort of upcoming machine economy. So I think there's definitely a lot of potential, certainly in the next year. We have plans to put, a good size amount of telecom assets on chain kind of starting off. So we're pretty excited about really kicking this into gear pretty quickly.
Really, that's terrific. It's a very diplomatic answer. It's not you've learned the hard way to not predict X billions of revenue by Y date. So that's probably a safe way to do it. You can't but still articulate the scale of this, because what I think is important is that those assets you're talking about bringing on chain, what's relevant is the amount of revenue that those assets can generate. That's the piece that really matters, right? The asset by itself, great, but like the revenue that can be pushed through that is what really matters, right?
Yeah, and so I would say that we have historical, reference that, the majority of telecom networks themselves, I mean, both legacy and Althea ones, usually have returns between 15 to 30%. And they're usually very, non-cyclical. They're sticky. They're utility type returns. So that we do feel like they're healthy markets. We think it's a really exciting, new market that really isn't very open right now. But that is kind of one of the neat promises of blockchain and why we build in this space, is because we can then open up these markets to, and then on the other side, we can allow some of these telcos who are struggling with those assets on the book, but also very debt heavy, be able to really leverage those in new ways.
Interesting. And we sort of touched on this earlier, but just remind me again, what do you think, you talk about these assets that they can help monetize in other ways. What do you think a price savings is using this? How do you think of cost savings or price savings to businesses or consumers? Yeah,
it's kind of interesting because maybe think about this in a slightly different way. So, I had the opportunity to participate in a really cool thing at the New York Fed a couple of months back with broadband as an emerging asset class, really looking at these sort of assets in different ways. But what do we think the discount is for the liquidity on the assets themselves? And I think, we're looking at a decent multiplier in value of the assets once they become more liquid. So yes, in terms of cost savings, that might be a little bit harder to quantify, but what we can say, I think pretty definitively, is that it opens up, a good 25% of the market that's not accessible otherwise. And, I think there's an exciting potential to really explore the true value of of a tower or fiber optic cable once it becomes, a more liquid asset.
So you can monetize it more thoroughly. So you're saying you can sell more pieces of it effectively because it's not being optimized right now.
Yeah, correct. You can sell more pieces, or lending and borrowing. Think about that, right? So a lot of companies borrow based on their balance sheet, based on their assets, but those are basically discounted currently because they're illiquid. It's very hard to move around your 5 telecom towers and still keep your company running, right? So they're discounted for, illiquidity. But what happens when you say, okay, well, look, I can fractionalize this tower and, have some revenue share agreement. Basically, that's what liquid infrastructure does. Well, I'm still maintaining 50% of this tower. That, really allows a lot of flexibility. And I think that flexibility is really going to be key to, what infrastructure looks like in the future. And we're already seeing a lot of brittleness really break down, over the last few years as capital started to be more expensive. Actually, RCR Wireless, I think, coined the term bankruptcy G because it's been such a problematic time period. So I think it's really good timing to bring into this product to market.
Interesting. Great. Well, when you talk about timing of this market, question for you: are there other DePIN projects? I mentioned a couple, but if you think about the space, whether they're in telco or not, any other projects that you think are doing something interesting, innovative, or have really, big potential?
Oh, I think they're all interesting. And I think, I really appreciate the work that they're, kind of the education that goes into just sort of understanding even how the telecom or DePIN works in general. I think energy is going to be a very exciting space and a longer maybe term horizon than we all would like, but decentralized energy makes a ton of sense, right? And I think we'll probably follow. I think there's some folks doing some interesting stuff in data collection and telemetry data. Rome is doing some stuff on telemetry data that's kind of interesting. Foam is another OG project that you don't hear about too much, but they were around for a while doing kind of a decentralized GPS. They're kind of an interesting project as well, making some sense.
I've had Ryan on the podcast, so he was early on the podcast, so know him for sure.
Yeah. So I think those projects are interesting. I think the Wi-Fi offload is makes a lot of sense. Again, I do think that it'll probably pivot to a more enterprise-like model, but I think makes a lot of sense for right now.
Interesting. Well, and then let's see another question for you. This is the second to last one. Given you were a Bitcoin miner before DePIN existed, before many people who even started DePIN projects knew what crypto was. Tell us where you think Bitcoin is by the end of the year. We got a couple months left with some big points coming on. So any predictions?
Oof, that's always a hard one. As you know, I've carefully avoided making any hard predictions. Yeah, I mean, for me, I hold my Bitcoin from the beginning. I'm a kind of a true believer that these things are the future. So I mean, I don't know. I think this will be probably a pretty good year with the rate cuts. But obviously the U.S. election is going to play a part in that. So no definitive answer for me, but probably positive.
Positive. I think your point is I don't care because I just know it's going up over the long term. So I don't care what happens is sort of in the near term is I think what you're saying more.
Yeah. I mean, I think one defining characteristics.
Don't bother me with these questions.
It's going to go, yeah, exactly. It's going to be here, it was there in the past, it's here today, and we'll be there tomorrow.
Definitely right. Well, I agree with you there for sure. Well, listen, tell us how people can get in touch, can follow if they want to. Someone wants to try to see if their community is right to launch an Althea kind of network or sub-network, or how do they learn more about the project and get involved?
Yeah, I appreciate that. Twitter is a great place to follow us for announcements. Got some exciting stuff coming up. So that's network. And then you can link to our Discord there where we engage community. So, and also we're looking for folks that write good content. So if you have audience members that are looking to write some content, we'd love to meet them. So yeah, those are our primary methods is, shoot us a message in Discord, get involved, or follow us on Twitter.
And the Twitter is Althea Network, yep. _ network.
Yeah. Althea Network.
Althea Network. Fantastic. Listen, thank you for being on and wish you all success and can't wait to have you back on and learn more about the rollouts and how everything is going.
All right. Thanks so much for having me.